He said I was damaged goods after the assault. Those words slithered out of his mouth like poison, settling into my bones where they'd fester for months before I finally turned them into something lethal, something that would end his career, his reputation, and that smug sense of untouchability he wore like expensive cologne. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. You know that feeling when your life splits into a clear before and after? When you can practically hear the universe snapping its fingers and saying, "Pay attention, kid. Nothing's gonna be the same after this." That's what happened to me 11 months ago. I used to be the office golden child. 3 promotions in 4 years. The one who volunteered for the impossible projects. The one who made the clients feel special. I wasn't just good at my job. I was the standard everyone else measured themselves against. And I worked my ass off for that position, clawing my way up from entry level with nothing but student loan debt and desperation. Of course, Charles took credit for discovering me. Charles Peterson, executive creative director, industry visionary, and the man who would eventually call me damaged goods. Back then, I actually believed him when he said he saw something special in me. Thought I was so lucky to have such a powerful mentor. Funny how much clearer you see things in retrospect. The company Christmas party was at some overpriced rooftop bar downtown, one of those places with $15 cocktails named after literary references nobody gets. I remember watching the snow fall through the glass ceiling while nursing my second gin and tonic, thinking about the client presentation I had to finish over the weekend. Charles had been extra attentive that night, introducing me to the higher-ups from corporate, making sure my drink was never empty. I thought it was professional kindness, maybe even respect. The way you'd treat a valued colleague. When he suggested we step onto the terrace to discuss my upcoming promotion, I didn't think twice. It was cold outside, but my ambition kept me warm. Or maybe that was the gin. Either way, I followed him out there, breath clouding in the December air, heart full of professional pride. I don't remember exactly how it turned. Maybe it was the way his hand moved from my shoulder to my lower back. Or how he stood just a little too close, alcohol heavy on his breath. All I know is that one minute we were discussing my career trajectory, and the next minute he was pressing me against the railing, his mouth on my neck, hands grabbing at my clothes. Everything went blurry after that. Not because I blacked out. No, my brain was painfully, acutely present. But because trauma has a way of fragmenting memories into jagged little pieces that don't quite fit together anymore. I remember the cold metal of the railing against my back, the sound of distant laughter from inside. The weight of him, my voice saying stop and no and finally just please, the shock in his eyes when I managed to shove him back, the way my legs shook as I ran back inside, grabbing my coat, not saying goodbye to anyone. The next morning, my phone lit up with his name, 3 missed calls, a text that just said, "We should talk." I threw up in my bathroom sink. Have you ever tried to pretend something didn't happen so hard that you almost convince yourself? That was me for the next week. I went to work. I smiled at meetings. I avoided the break room, took the stairs instead of the elevator, and scheduled my day around not being alone with him. I thought if I just acted normal, it would eventually become normal again. Denial is a hell of a drug. It might have worked if Melissa from HR hadn't cornered me in the copy room. Apparently, Charles had already gotten ahead of the situation, said I'd had too much to drink at the party and made an inappropriate advance that he'd gentlemanly rebuffed. He was concerned about my emotional stability, but didn't want to make an issue of it. My stomach dropped to my feet. "That's not what happened," I managed to say, voice barely a whisper. Melissa's face did that thing that professional HR people perfect, sympathetic but neutral. "These situations are always complicated," she said, "but Charles has been with the company for 15 years. His reputation speaks for itself." Translation: nobody was going to believe me over him. I nodded, numb, and walked back to my desk with my uncopied document still clutched in my hand. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, the office noise too loud. Everything was normal except me. For the next month, I became a ghost of myself. Lost 10 pounds because food tasted like nothing. Jumped every time my phone rang. Stared at my ceiling until 3 a.m., replaying that night, wondering if I'd somehow invited this, if I'd missed some signal, if I'd... No. Stop! Even now I can feel my brain trying to take the blame. That's what they do to us, you know? Make us question our own reality until we're building a case against ourselves. The damaged goods comment came 6 weeks after the Christmas party. I'd finally worked up the courage to request a department transfer. Nothing formal about why, just said I was interested in expanding my skill set. My hands shook as I pressed send on the email. Charles called me into his office less than an hour later. "Close the door," he said, not looking up from his computer. I left it open an inch, just enough that anyone walking by could hear if I screamed. The thought made me sick, that I now calculated exit strategies and witness potential in every interaction with him. "So," he leaned back in his chair, finally looking at me, "you want to transfer departments?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I have to say, I'm disappointed." His voice was calm, reasonable, like he was giving constructive feedback. "After all I've invested in you, after all the opportunities I've given you." My throat tightened. The audacity. The absolute fucking audacity. "I think it's best for everyone," I managed to say. He sighed, rubbing his temples like I was giving him a migraine. "Look, what happened at the Christmas party?" "Nothing happened," I interrupted, the lie automatic by now. "Self-preservation instinct?" "Exactly." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing happened, so I don't understand why you're acting like this. You were on track for senior management. Do you really want to throw that away over a misunderstanding?" A misunderstanding. Is that what we're calling sexual assault these days? "I'm not throwing anything away," I said. "I just think—" "The problem," he cut me off, "is that you're letting one awkward moment define your entire career trajectory." He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Between us, this kind of reaction makes you look unstable. It makes people question your judgment. And in this industry, perception is everything." My hands curled into fists under the desk. "Nobody wants to invest in damaged goods," he said, the words casual, like he was discussing a business strategy. "And that's what you'll be if you keep this up. Damaged goods." There it was, the moment my world cracked in half. I don't remember leaving his office. Don't remember the rest of that workday. I drove home on autopilot, pulled into my parking spot, and sat there with the engine off for almost an hour, those two words echoing in my head. Damaged goods, like I was a returned package, a scratched clearance item, something to be devalued because of what he had done to me. I finally dragged myself up to my apartment and straight into the shower, where I sat under water hot enough to turn my skin red, crying until I had nothing left. Rock bottom has this strange clarity to it. When you've hit it, really hit it, there's a moment of perfect stillness where you can see everything for what it is. I wasn't the one who was damaged. The system was damaged. He was damaged. But I was the one paying the price. That night, something shifted in me. The fear and shame that had been choking me for weeks began to harden into something else. Something with edges. I looked at myself in the foggy bathroom mirror, hair dripping, eyes swollen from crying, and thought, fuck this. Fuck him. Fuck damaged goods. They say rock bottom is where you either break for good or find the strength you never knew you had. I found something all right. But it wasn't just strength. It was rage. Pure, clarifying rage. And rage, when properly channeled, makes a hell of a fuel. I slept for 12 hours straight that night, the first real sleep I'd had since the assault. When I woke up, my mind was startlingly clear. The panic and confusion that had clouded my thoughts for weeks had burned away, leaving behind a single, focused purpose. He thought I was damaged goods? Fine. Let him think that. Let him underestimate me. Let him believe I was broken beyond repair. Because broken things have edges, sharp ones. And I was about to show Charles Peterson exactly how deep those edges could cut. I made myself breakfast that morning. Actually tasted the food for the first time in weeks. Took a long shower, did my hair, put on makeup. Armor of normalcy. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside? Inside, I was already plotting his downfall. I just needed a plan. A perfect, meticulous, bulletproof plan. Because when you're going after someone with power, you only get one shot. Miss, and they'll destroy whatever's left of you. So I couldn't miss. I walked into the office that day with my head high, smiling at coworkers, laughing at their jokes. The picture of recovery, of moving on. Little did Charles know that while he thought he'd broken me, he'd actually just created his own worst nightmare. Someone with nothing left to lose. Someone who knew all his secrets. Someone who was ready to burn it all down. And I was just getting started. The thing about revenge is that it requires patience. Not the virtue kind, the predator kind. The way a spider waits in its web, feeling every vibration, knowing exactly when to strike. I gave myself 3 days to wallow. 3 days of delivery food, unwashed hair, and rotating between rage crying and plotting in my journal like a supervillain. After that, it was game time. First rule of taking down someone powerful: know exactly what you're up against. Charles Peterson, 47, executive creative director, divorced twice, known for discovering young female talent. Industry darling with a list of awards longer than my student loan debt, and, as I was starting to piece together, a pattern of behavior that the company had been quietly enabling for years. I began my research casually. Coffee with former female colleagues who'd suddenly left the company. Happy hour with the office assistants who see everything. Lunch with Jen from legal, who'd had one too many margaritas and let slip that there had been situations before, but NDAs were standard procedure. NDAS, plural, as in multiple, as in I wasn't the first. Each conversation was like finding another piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving, a puzzle that revealed a picture of systematic abuse protected by corporate machinery. "He's just handsy when he drinks," people would say with a shrug. "That's just Charles being Charles, just Charles being Charles," like it was a charming personality quirk instead of assault. The rage I'd been nursing flared hotter, not just for me now but for all of us. All the women who'd been made to feel like they were the problem. All the careers derailed or diverted. All the NDAs signed in exchange for severance packages and references. But rage without direction is just a bonfire that burns you up from inside. I needed to be strategic, methodical, patient. So I made a plan. Step 1, document everything. I started keeping obsessive records. Every interaction with Charles, time-stamped and recorded in a journal I kept locked in my desk drawer. Every email saved to an external drive. Every meeting request photographed on my phone. If he so much as looked at me in the break room, I noted it. Paranoid? Maybe. Thorough? Absolutely. I also set up a separate email account where I forwarded every communication with him. If anything accidentally disappeared from the company servers, I'd have backups. Step 2, build a network. This part was tricky. I couldn't just announce, "Hey, I'm collecting evidence to destroy our boss, wanna help?" But I could rebuild connections that had frayed in the weeks after the assault when I'd withdrawn from everyone. I started having lunch in the break room instead of at my desk. Joined after-work drinks even when I didn't feel like it. Volunteered for group projects, all while watching, listening, identifying potential allies. Sarah from accounting, who always changed her route to avoid passing Charles's office. Miguel, the IT guy who rolled his eyes whenever Charles made jokes about women. Tanya, the new hire who Charles had already invited for career mentorship drinks. Each person was a potential resource, a potential witness, a potential crack in the wall of silence. Step 3, find the leverage. Every powerful person has vulnerabilities. The trick is finding the one that will do maximum damage with minimum risk to yourself. I spent weeks watching Charles like he was a specimen under glass. I learned his patterns, his preferences, his pressure points, the clients he prioritized, the bosses he feared, the rules he thought didn't apply to him, and I started to notice things. Like how he always took long lunches on Wednesdays with the same client rep from Meridian Holdings. How they both returned flushed and slightly disheveled. How expense reports for those lunches sometimes never materialized or were filed under different client names. Or how he kept a second phone that only came out after hours, and how he'd step away to take calls on it during important meetings. Or how certain freelancers always got contracts despite submitting subpar work, and how those same freelancers seemed to have convenient personal connections to Charles. I wasn't just collecting evidence about what he'd done to me anymore. I was mapping out a pattern of professional misconduct that would make HR and legal break out in cold sweats. The investigation became my obsession. My reason to get up in the morning. My secret purpose humming beneath every mundane workday. I'd sit in meetings where Charles was holding court, nodding along with everyone else, while mentally cataloging each lie, each manipulation, each ethical violation. It was almost exhilarating, like being a spy in enemy territory. But let me tell you, living a double life is exhausting. Pretending normalcy while plotting destruction takes a toll. There were nights I'd come home and collapse into bed fully dressed, too tired to even cry. Days where the mask would slip, and I'd have to lock myself in a bathroom stall to breathe through the panic or rage. And the worst part? The doubt. The voice in my head questioning if I was overreacting, if I was becoming obsessed, if I was turning into someone I wouldn't recognize. That voice sounded suspiciously like Charles. 2 months into my information-gathering campaign, I had a breakdown in my therapist's office. Yes, I finally got a therapist. Turns out plotting elaborate revenge doesn't actually heal trauma. Who knew? What if I'm becoming just as toxic as he is? I sobbed, clutching a throw pillow like it was a life preserver. What if this whole revenge thing is just making me bitter and paranoid? Doctor, Winters let me cry it out before speaking. There's a difference, she said carefully, between justice and revenge. Justice is about correction. Revenge is about pain. I looked up, mascara probably making me look like a drowned raccoon. What's your point? My point is, what do you actually want here? Do you want him to suffer, or do you want to prevent what happened to you from happening to someone else? I opened my mouth to say both, obviously, but stopped myself. The question deserved honest reflection. Did I want him to suffer? Absolutely. The fantasy of Charles losing everything had kept me warm on many cold nights. But was that the end game? I want accountability, I said finally. I want the company to stop protecting predators. I want him to face consequences. And yes, I want him to know it was me who made it happen. Doctor, Winters nodded. Then focus on the accountability. The system, not just the man. That's justice, not revenge. I left that session with a slightly adjusted perspective. My plan wasn't just about destroying Charles anymore. It was about exposing a system that enabled him. It was about making sure what happened to me couldn't happen again, at least not without consequences. Justice with a side of personal satisfaction. I could work with that. By month 3 of Operation Career Cremation, yes, I named it Don't Judge, I had enough documentation to make anyone nervous. Expense report discrepancies, violations of client confidentiality, evidence of favoritism in hiring and project assignments, and most damning, testimonials from 3 former employees who'd had experiences similar to mine, one of whom was willing to break her NDA if others came forward too. What I didn't have was concrete evidence of my own assault. It was still my word against his. And in corporate America, the word of an executive creative director carries more weight than a mid-level manager, no matter how promising they once were. I needed something irrefutable, something even the old boys club couldn't dismiss or bury. The opportunity came, as they often do, when I least expected it. Our biggest client, North Star Media, was launching a new division focused on empowering women in business. The irony was not lost on me. They wanted a complete branding package, logo, messaging, social media strategy, the works, and they wanted our top creative team on it, which unfortunately meant Charles. The kickoff meeting was scheduled in our main conference room. All hands on deck. The client team would be there in full force, including their female CEO, who'd made gender equality in the workplace her personal mission. I spent the night before that meeting staring at my ceiling, a plan forming that was either brilliant or career suicide. Maybe both. Risk assessment time. If I failed, I'd definitely lose my job. Possibly get blacklisted in the industry. Maybe even face legal action for defamation. But if I succeeded, the meeting was set for 10 a.m. I arrived at 8:30, earlier than anyone except the cleaning staff. I needed time to prepare, to breathe, to calm the earthquake happening in my chest. By 9:45, the conference room was filling up. Our team on one side, North Star executives filing in on the other. Charles working the room like the charismatic leader everyone thought he was, shaking hands, making introductions, laughing just a touch too loudly. He barely glanced at me. Damaged goods weren't worth his attention anymore. At exactly 9:53, I slipped out to grab my notebook and detoured to Charles's office. Empty, as expected. Door unlocked, as always, the privilege of seniority. I placed a small package on his desk, angled so he'd see it immediately upon return, and hurried back to the conference room. The meeting proceeded as these things do. Presentations, questions, strategic discussions about authentic female empowerment from men who'd never once worried about walking to their cars alone at night. Charles was in peak form, spinning beautiful narratives about North Star's commitment to women, about creating safe spaces for female voices to be heard, about the importance of standing up against systemic sexism in corporate culture. I thought I might throw up from the hypocrisy. At 11:17, his assistant poked her head in to tell him he had an urgent call. He excused himself, promising to return quickly. 3 minutes later, I felt my phone vibrate. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Check your email. Now." I discreetly opened my inbox under the table. New message from an anonymous account. Subject line, "Got your package." The package I'd left contained 2 things, a burner phone and a note with instructions to text me when he was alone. I slipped out of the conference room, mumbling something about the bathroom. Once in the hallway, I called the burner number. He answered immediately. "What the fuck is this?" His voice was low, controlled rage. Consider it an exit opportunity, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. An exit? Are you threatening me? Do you know who the fuck you're dealing with? Actually, Charles, I do. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And so will everyone else unless you listen very carefully. I laid out my terms. Simple, direct, impossible to misinterpret. He would resign. Effective immediately. Citing personal reasons, health concerns, whatever fiction preserved his precious ego. He would recommend me to lead the North Star Project in his absence. He would never work in this city again. In exchange, the extensive documentation I'd collected on his financial improprieties, ethical violations, and pattern of sexual harassment would remain private. This is blackmail, he hissed. No, this is consequences, I corrected. For the first time in your career, you're facing actual consequences for your actions. You don't have anything, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. It's your word against mine, and we both know which one carries more weight. Maybe once. But I'm not alone anymore. And I'm not the scared employee you cornered at the Christmas party. I've spent the last 3 months building a case that would make any HR department or board of directors break out in hives. 6 women, Charles. 6 women with similar stories. 2 willing to break NDAs. Financial records showing pattern discrepancies. Documented policy violations. And it's all packaged and ready to go to the board, the press, and that lovely female CEO from North Star who's sitting in our conference room right now, talking about female empowerment. Silence on the other end. I could almost hear him calculating, weighing options, looking for escape routes. You have until the end of this meeting to decide, I continued. Either you announce your resignation and recommend me for the North Star Project, or by 5 p.m., everyone knows exactly who Charles Peterson really is. I hung up and returned to the conference room, sliding into my seat just as the North Star CEO was discussing authentic representation. For the next 20 minutes, I took notes and asked relevant questions like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just delivered an ultimatum that would determine both our professional futures. My hands were shaking, but I kept them under the table. My heart was racing, but I kept my face neutral. Charles returned at 11:43. Something had shifted in his demeanor. The swagger dimmed. The smile strained at the edges. Our eyes met briefly across the table, his narrowed in hatred, mine steady with resolve. When the meeting agenda turned to project leadership, he cleared his throat. Actually, he said, I have an announcement to make. The room went quiet. I held my breath. Due to some personal matters requiring my immediate attention, I'll be stepping down from my position. Effective end of day. Gasps. Confused glances. The client team shifting uncomfortably. It's been a difficult decision, he continued, not looking at me, but sometimes life throws curveballs that require our full attention. I've already spoken with senior leadership about transition plans. He paused, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly before continuing. I'd like to recommend that this project be led by our very capable, a fractional hesitation, our very capable team member here. He gestured toward me without making eye contact. She's more than ready to take this on, and I have full confidence in her abilities. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Concern for Charles. Questions about the transition. Reassurances that the project wouldn't suffer. I said all the right things, played the surprised but prepared professional stepping up in a crisis. Inside, I was floating somewhere near the ceiling, watching myself perform this role with perfect composure, while my mind screamed in disbelief and triumph. He'd folded. He'd actually folded. As the room cleared out, Charles lingered, waiting until we were the last 2 people present. You won't get away with this, he said quietly, all pretense gone from his voice. You have no idea the enemies you've just made. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the assault. Without the filter of fear, he seemed smaller somehow, less mythic. Just a man who'd built a career on intimidation and leverage, suddenly finding those same tools used against him. Maybe, I shrugged, gathering my materials unhurried, but right now, I'm not the one packing up my office. I walked out of that conference room feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Powerful. Like I'd reclaimed something essential that had been taken from me. But as the adrenaline faded, reality set in. I'd won the battle, but the war was just beginning. Charles had connections throughout the industry, allies in senior leadership, a reputation built over decades, and I'd just made him my enemy. As satisfying as that moment of victory had been, I knew the real test was coming. He wouldn't go quietly. Men like Charles never do. The question was, had I prepared enough for the counterattack? Because make no mistake, it was coming, and it would be brutal. I lasted exactly 43 hours. 43 hours between Charles's resignation and the start of his scorched earth campaign against me. I wasn't even surprised when it began, just disappointed I hadn't gotten more of a head start. The first shot came in the form of a company-wide email from Howard Brewer, CEO and Charles's longtime golf buddy. The message praised Charles's extraordinary contributions and announced a temporary leadership restructuring that placed Patrick Downey, Charles's right-hand yes-man, as interim executive creative director. No mention of me. No mention of the North Star Project. I read the email 3 times, searching for hidden meanings between the corporate doublespeak, while my phone blew up with texts from colleagues asking what the hell was happening. What was happening was crystal clear. Charles might be gone, but his influence remained, and he was using it to erase me. By noon, I'd been removed from the North Star Project email chain. By 2, my access to the shared creative drive had been accidentally revoked. By 4, I was summoned to a meeting with Howard and Patrick to discuss project reassignments. They'd put me in the small conference room, the one with no windows, and made me wait 20 minutes. Classic power move. I spent those minutes giving myself a pep talk in my head, reviewing my leverage, and reminding myself that I had prepared for this. When they finally entered, neither man made eye contact. Howard shuffled papers while Patrick studied his shoes. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I broke it. "Gentlemen, is there a problem?" Howard cleared his throat. "Given the unexpected changes in leadership, we're reevaluating project assignments to ensure client satisfaction during the transition." Translation: Charles told them to bury me. "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "And how does this affect the North Star project that Charles specifically recommended me to lead?" Patrick jumped in. "We feel that project requires someone with more senior experience. The client expects a certain level of leadership." "The client seemed perfectly comfortable with me in the meeting yesterday," I countered. "In fact, Amanda Rogers specifically mentioned her excitement about working with me after Charles's announcement." More uncomfortable shifting. More avoided eye contact. "It's not personal," Howard said, finally looking at me. "It's just better for the company this way." But it was personal. We all knew it was personal. "I understand," I said, surprising them with my apparent compliance. "Can I ask who will be leading the project instead?" "Patrick will take point," Howard replied, visibly relieved by my reaction. I nodded thoughtfully. "And have you informed North Star of this change?" "Specifically Amanda?" Patrick's face tightened. "Bingo. We're handling client communications appropriately," he said stiffly. I smiled. "Of course. I just wonder if Amanda knows that after yesterday's discussion about female empowerment and authentic representation, you've removed the only woman from the leadership team and replaced her with—" I gestured vaguely at Patrick. "Well, not a woman." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "That's not—" Patrick started. "Fair," I finished for him. "You're right. It's not. But neither is removing me from a project without cause after I was publicly endorsed to lead it." I leaned forward. "It almost looks like retaliation." That magic word, retaliation, hung in the air like smoke. Any HR professional worth their salary fears that word above all others. It's the corporate equivalent of saying lawsuit without actually saying lawsuit. Howard recovered first. "No one is retaliating against anyone. We're simply making decisions that are best for the agency during a challenging transition." "I understand completely," I said, standing up. "And I respect your position. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what's happening, so there's no misunderstanding later." I headed for the door, then paused with my hand on the knob. "Oh, one more thing. I took the liberty of having coffee with Amanda this morning to discuss creative directions. She mentioned how refreshing it was to finally have a woman leading a campaign about women's empowerment. I'd be happy to join you when you tell her about the change, just to ensure continuity for the client." Complete lie. I hadn't spoken to Amanda since the meeting. But they didn't know that. The look they exchanged was worth every second of discomfort. "Let us revisit the project assignments," Howard said carefully. "Perhaps we were hasty in our restructuring." I smiled. "Wonderful. I'll continue with the preliminary work then. Let me know if you need anything else." And I walked out, heart pounding like I'd run a marathon, legs barely holding me up. Round 1, mine. But I knew the counterattacks were just beginning. Charles wouldn't stop at trying to sideline me professionally. He'd go for reputation destruction next. Sure enough, the whispers started the following day. Suddenly, everyone was having hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. Colleagues who'd been friendly were now distant. Someone left a printout of the company's anti-blackmail policy on my desk, unsigned, of course. The rumor mill was running overtime, and it wasn't difficult to guess who was feeding it. I'd anticipated this, had known character assassination would be part of Charles's playbook. What I hadn't expected was how deeply it would hurt. These were people I'd worked alongside for years. People who'd celebrated my successes, who'd come to my birthday happy hours, who'd once respected me. Now they looked at me like I was radioactive. By week's end, the dominant narrative had coalesced. I was an ambitious climber who'd manipulated Charles's personal crisis to advance my career. The details were deliberately vague. Was I sleeping with him? Had I threatened him? Was I somehow responsible for his personal issues? The truth didn't matter. The cloud of suspicion was enough. Lesser opponents might have crumbled under that social pressure, might have accepted defeat, taken a settlement, moved on to another agency with their reputation tarnished, but their bank account padded. But they hadn't been called damaged goods. They hadn't spent months meticulously building a case. And they definitely weren't me. Time to launch Phase 2. My first call was to Northstar's CEO, Amanda Rogers. Not to whine about office politics, but to schedule a female leadership lunch to discuss authentic messaging for the campaign. Just the two of us, woman to woman, creator to client. We met at an upscale sushi place far from the office. After 15 minutes of genuine campaign discussion, I carefully steered the conversation. I have to say, Amanda, your focus on female empowerment is refreshing, especially in industries where women still face significant barriers. She nodded, stirring her miso soup. It's personal for me. I had to fight through plenty of boys' club nonsense to get where I am. Perfect opening. I completely understand. Actually, I hesitated, my performance calibrated to seem reluctant. Can I be candid with you? Woman to woman? Of course, she said, leaning in slightly. There's a situation at the agency that's been concerning me, especially as I work on a campaign about women's empowerment. It feels hypocritical to champion these values publicly while ignoring issues internally. I proceeded to share a carefully edited version of the truth. The Christmas party. The unwanted advances, the damaged goods comment, the pattern of behavior with other women, all presented not as accusations, but as ethical concerns from someone who cared deeply about authentic representation. I've been struggling with how to address this, I finished. I want to create an amazing campaign for Northstar, but I also feel responsible to the women who might face similar situations in the future. Amanda sat very still, her lunch forgotten. And this person, the one with the pattern of behavior, was it Charles Peterson? I allowed myself to look surprised. You knew? She gave a humorless laugh. Let's just say certain reputations travel beyond agency walls. There were rumors. Nothing concrete enough to justify refusing to work with him, but enough to make me wary. That's partly why his sudden resignation concerned me, I admitted. It felt like another situation being swept under the rug. Are you telling me this because you want Northstar to intervene somehow? She asked directly. Absolutely not, I said firmly. I'm telling you because I respect you and your mission too much to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. The campaign deserves authenticity, and you deserve transparency from your creative partners. Amanda studied me for a long moment. I appreciate your honesty. And to be equally honest, I'm not entirely comfortable with my female empowerment campaign being created in an environment that doesn't value women. She reached for her phone. I think I need to have a conversation with Howard about our agency expectations. I maintained a perfect mask of professional concern, even as victory buzzed through my veins. I understand completely. Whatever you decide, please know that my team and I are fully committed to creating exceptional work for Northstar. By the time I returned to the office, Howard was looking for me, his face ashen. Apparently, Amanda had made it very clear that any change in creative leadership would result in Northstar taking their considerable business elsewhere. Round 2, mine. But securing my position on the Northstar project was just one piece of a larger strategy. I needed more. I needed public accountability, not just private consequences. The opportunity came from an unexpected source, Jen from legal, who'd let slip about the NDAs months ago. She cornered me in the parking garage after work, glancing around nervously before speaking. Is it true what they're saying? About you and Charles? I regarded her carefully. What exactly are they saying, Jen? That you pressured him somehow? That you're the reason he left? Interesting theory, I said, neither confirming nor denying. What do you think? She fidgeted with her car keys. I think there were 3 NDAs in the last 5 years. All young women, all creative team members, all who worked directly with Charles. She met my eyes. And I think the company is legally vulnerable if a pattern of ignored harassment can be established. My pulse quickened. Are you giving me legal advice, Jen? I'm not giving anyone advice, she said quickly. I'm just thinking out loud about hypothetical corporate liability. Especially if, hypothetically, multiple women came forward simultaneously, making individual NDAs harder to enforce. I could have hugged her. Hypothetically speaking, that's fascinating. The board meets next Thursday, she added, unlocking her car. Hypothetically, that would be an optimal time for any such revelations, since all decision-makers would be in one place. As she drove away, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used yet. Eliza Parker, former creative director, first recipient of an NDA 3 years ago. We'd spoken briefly during my information-gathering phase, but she'd been reluctant to go on record, afraid of legal repercussions. Time to see if that had changed. Eliza? It's me. I think it's time we finish our conversation. The following week was a blur of clandestine meetings, late-night phone calls, and strategic planning. Eliza introduced me to Rachel, who connected me with Diane. 3 women with 3 stories, different in details but identical in pattern. Charles's behavior. The company's dismissal. The pressure to sign NDAs and disappear. Together we drafted a letter to the board of directors. Clear, factual, devastating in its accumulated evidence. Each woman contributed her documentation. Emails, HR complaints, contemporaneous notes. Combined with my own extensive records, it created an undeniable pattern of predatory behavior and corporate negligence. The letter didn't just name Charles. It named every executive who'd facilitated cover-ups, every HR representative who'd pressured women to stay silent, every corporate policy that prioritized protecting powerful men over ensuring workplace safety. We sent it to arrive during the board meeting, each of us signing our names. No anonymity, no hiding. 4 women standing together, making it impossible to dismiss any of us as isolated incidents or disgruntled employees. For good measure, I CC'd Amanda Rogers at Northstar, and the CEOs of our 3 other biggest clients, and a journalist at Adweek who'd recently written about the hashtag #MeToo in advertising. Was it nuclear? Absolutely. But when you're dismantling a system designed to silence you, subtlety is rarely effective. I slept surprisingly well that night. Whatever happened next, we'd spoken our truth. We'd stood together. We'd refused to be damaged goods relegated to the corporate clearance rack. The explosion came exactly as expected. Emergency board meetings. Panicked calls from client relations. Legal scrambling to assess liability. My email and phone blowing up with messages ranging from supportive to threatening. I went to work as usual the next day, head high, expression neutral. The office was chaotic. Hushed conversations, closed-door meetings, HR representatives scurrying between departments like panicked ants. No one knew quite how to treat me. Was I a whistleblower to be feared? A troublemaker to be avoided? A crusader to be admired? People settled for awkward nods and wide berths. Mid-morning, Howard's assistant called me to his office. Here comes the termination, I thought, gathering my courage. I'd known this might be the outcome. Had prepared for it financially and emotionally. But when I entered Howard's office, I found not just him, but 3 board members and the company's outside counsel. Their expressions ranged from constipated discomfort to barely concealed panic. "Please, sit down," Howard said, gesturing to the chair directly facing their impromptu firing squad. I sat back straight, expression pleasant but not deferential. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" The outside counsel, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, cleared her throat. "We've received your letter along with those from Ms. Parker, Ms. Davis, and Ms. Johnston. The board is taking these allegations very seriously." I nodded but said nothing. Never interrupt when someone is digging their own grave. "We want to assure you that the company has 0 tolerance for the behavior described," Howard added quickly. I couldn't help myself. "Since when?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, which it was. What Howard means, one of the board members interjected, is that the board was not fully aware of the extent of these issues. Now that we are, we're committed to addressing them comprehensively. Translation: we're terrified of lawsuits and bad press. I'm glad to hear that, I said. What specific actions are you planning to take? They exchanged glances, clearly having expected either hysterics or eager acceptance of whatever crumbs they offered. The lawyer took control. We're prepared to offer you and the other affected employees a settlement package that would include compensation for emotional distress, career impact, and legal fees. In exchange, I'm not interested in a settlement, I interrupted calmly. And I can't speak for the others, but I suspect they aren't either. We didn't come forward for money. Then what do you want? Howard asked, frustration breaking through his corporate mask. What did I want? Such a simple question with such a complex answer. I wanted accountability. I wanted systemic change. I wanted every person who enabled Charles to face consequences. But mostly I wanted to reclaim my worth, to transform from damaged goods back into a human being deserving of dignity and respect. I want a public statement acknowledging the company's failure to address repeated harassment complaints. I want a third-party audit of all HR practices and previous complaints. I want a new harassment policy with actual teeth, developed with input from affected employees. And I want Charles Peterson's termination to be officially amended to reflect the real reasons for his departure. Howard started to object, but the lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm. Those are significant requests with potential liability implications. More significant than 4 women going public with their stories? More significant than losing North Star and potentially other clients? More significant than an Adweek expose on how your company enables sexual predators? I smiled without warmth. I'm not making threats. I'm simply identifying the reality we're all facing. The meeting ended with vague assurances that they would consider my requests and be in touch soon. I walked out knowing the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. They needed my cooperation more than I needed their approval. For the first time since the Christmas party, I felt completely in control. The company's public statement came 3 days later. It acknowledged failures in addressing workplace misconduct and announced a comprehensive review of policies and past complaints. It didn't name Charles specifically, but confirmed that an executive had been terminated due to multiple violations of company policy regarding appropriate workplace conduct. Terminated, not resigned. Terminated. The distinction mattered. Resignation suggested choice, dignity, perhaps even another opportunity elsewhere. Termination was unambiguous disgrace. Charles Peterson, industry darling, had been fired for sexual harassment. His carefully cultivated reputation was in tatters. His career trajectory irrevocably altered. The day after the statement, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Just 4 words. You ruined my life. I stared at the message, recognizing the melodrama even without the sender identification. There was a time when such a text would have terrified me. Now it just seemed pathetic. I typed back a single response. No, Charles. You ruined your own life when you decided women were objects to be used rather than colleagues to be respected. I just refused to let you ruin mine, too. Then I blocked the number. In the weeks that followed, the story broke wide. Adweek published their piece, followed by coverage in major business publications. The narrative was everything we'd hoped for, not just another nonchalant Me Too scandal, but an examination of the systems that protect powerful abusers and silence victims. Charles disappeared from social media. According to industry gossip, he'd moved to Arizona, unable to find work in any major agency after the publicity. Apparently, being a known sexual harasser had finally become bad for business. I kept my job. Not out of charity, but because the North Star campaign had become the agency's most visible project, and Amanda Rogers had made it clear she would work only with me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The damaged goods was now the company's most valuable asset. The women who came forward with me experienced various outcomes. Eliza launched her own creative consultancy, using her newly public story as a platform to advocate for workplace safety. Rachel accepted a settlement but insisted on a non-confidentiality clause, allowing her to speak freely about her experience. Diane returned to the agency in a senior role created specifically to rebuild the creative department's culture. As for me, I poured myself into the North Star campaign, creating work that won industry awards and, more importantly, sparked genuine conversation about women's empowerment in the workplace. The campaign launched 6 months after Charles's termination. At the launch party, Amanda raised a toast to the power of women who refuse to be silenced. Everyone clinked glasses and smiled, many eyes turning to me with new respect. But I wasn't thinking about respect or vindication or even justice. I was thinking about that night on the terrace, about the weight of unwanted hands, about the words damaged goods, and how they'd once made me feel worthless. And I realized something important. I hadn't just reclaimed my career or my reputation. I'd reclaimed my voice, my power, my sense of self-worth. The best revenge wasn't getting Charles fired, satisfying as that had been. The best revenge was refusing to be defined by what he'd done to me, refusing to accept the label he'd tried to give me. I wasn't damaged goods. I never had been. I was a whole, complete person who had survived something terrible and emerged stronger. And nothing, not Charles, not the company, not even my own fear, could ever take that away from me again. It's been a year since everything went down. A whole year of rebuilding, restructuring, and, yes, I'll admit it, occasionally reveling in the knowledge that somewhere in Arizona, Charles Peterson was probably still licking his wounds and cursing my name. Not that I think about him much these days. Okay, that's a lie. I do think about him, but not in the all-consuming way I once did. He's been downgraded from central villain in my life story to cautionary tale I reference when mentoring junior employees. Progress, right? The company looks different now. Feels different too. The third-party audit we demanded uncovered 2 additional harassment cases that had been buried so deep even I hadn't found them in my investigation. Both women received public apologies and financial settlements that weren't tied to silence. We have a new head of HR, a no-nonsense woman with a background in corporate ethics, who looks like she could reduce a harasser to tears with a single raised eyebrow. The board added 2 female directors. And most significantly, the power dynamics have shifted. People speak up now. They report inappropriate behavior. They expect action. Is it perfect? Hell no. Corporate culture doesn't transform overnight, even after a public reckoning. There are still old guard executives who think things went too far. Still whispers about how you can't even compliment a woman anymore. Still eye rolls when mandatory harassment training is announced. But the difference is that these attitudes no longer control the narrative. They're the uncomfortable minority, not the protected standard. As for me, I'd love to say I emerged from the experience as a fearless warrior for justice, untouched by doubt or trauma. Social media would certainly paint it that way. The industry press has turned me into some kind of corporate number Me Too poster child. The creative who took down a predator. From Target to Triumph, how one woman transformed agency culture. The reality is messier, more human. I still flinch when a male colleague stands too close in the elevator. Still have nightmares about that Christmas party. Still see doctor. Winters every other week to process the lingering effects of trauma that no amount of professional validation can erase. But I'm healing. Not because Charles was punished, but because I reclaimed my own story. Because I refused to let someone else define my worth or my future. The North Star campaign exceeded everyone's expectations. We won 3 industry awards, including a Glass Lion at Cannes for addressing gender inequality. I got promoted to executive creative director. Yes, Charles's old position. The irony isn't lost on me. Amanda Rogers and I have become genuine friends. We have a standing monthly lunch where we talk about everything from campaign metrics to the ridiculousness of women's empowerment marketing that just repackages the same old beauty standards with feminist buzzwords. Last month, she asked the question everyone seems curious about but few dare to ask directly. Do you ever regret how public it all became? How nuclear you went? I considered it seriously, swirling the ice in my water glass. Sometimes I regret that it was necessary. That speaking quietly wasn't an option because the system was designed to muffle quiet voices. But the actual decision to go public? No. I don't regret that. Even with all the attention? The way some people still define you by that one situation? I smiled. You mean how I went from being that talented creative to that woman who took down her boss? She nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Here's the thing about labels, I said. They only stick if you accept them. Charles called me damaged goods, and for a while, I believed him. The industry now calls me a whistleblower or an activist, and I could let that become my entire identity too. But I'd rather just be a complex human who made a difficult choice in a specific circumstance. That's remarkably healthy, Amanda said, looking impressed. I laughed. Thank my therapist. I'm just repeating her greatest hits. The truth is, there are days I still doubt myself. Days I wonder if I went too far, was too ruthless, enjoyed his downfall too much. If the line between justice and revenge is thinner than I'd like to admit, I've made peace with that uncertainty. The messy, complicated reality of standing up for yourself in a world that would prefer you stay quiet is that there's no perfect way to do it. No path that doesn't involve some collateral damage, some questioning of motives, some internal reckoning with your own capacity for righteous cruelty. Last week I received an email that brought it all full circle. It was from a junior copywriter at another agency, someone I'd never met. She'd heard my story through industry channels and wanted me to know that she'd found the courage to report her own harasser because of what I'd done. I kept thinking, if she could stand up to an executive creative director, I can stand up to a senior copywriter, she wrote. They actually took it seriously. He's on leave pending investigation, and HR is being surprisingly human about the whole thing. So thank you, not just for yourself, but for making it a little easier for the rest of us. I cried when I read that. Not from lingering trauma or renewed anger, but from the profound realization that sometimes our hardest moments create pathways for others. That speaking truth to power ripples outward in ways we can't always predict. I printed that email. It's framed on my desk now, next to my Cannes Lion and a small framed note that says simply, "You were never damaged goods, Doctor." Winter suggested I write that note to myself as part of my therapy. Said I needed to internalize the message as deeply as Charles's cruel words had once embedded themselves in my psyche. It seemed cheesy at the time, but she was right. Some days I still need the reminder. People ask if I've forgiven Charles. It's the kind of question that comes from those who want neat, inspirational endings, where the wounded party transcends to some higher plane of existence through the mystical power of forgiveness. The honest answer? I haven't forgiven him. I don't think forgiveness is always necessary for healing. Sometimes boundaries are better than bridges. What I have done is release him from the center of my story. He doesn't get to be the villain around which my entire narrative revolves anymore. He's been demoted to a footnote, an unpleasant experience that influenced but doesn't define me. That's not forgiveness. That's freedom. And ultimately, that's what this whole journey has been about. Not revenge, though the satisfaction was undeniably sweet. Not justice, though the accountability was necessary. But freedom. The freedom to define myself on my own terms. The freedom to walk into a room without fear. The freedom to build a career based on my talent rather than my capacity to tolerate abuse. I'm not naive enough to think one victory changes the whole system. There are still predators in corner offices. Still victims signing NDAs. Still damaged goods labels being applied to women who dare to speak up. But there are also more people watching. More consequences. More cracks in the foundation of power that once seemed impenetrable. And there's me, one woman who refused to be silenced, refused to be devalued, refused to accept that the price of professional success should include personal degradation. That refusal created ripples that are still expanding. And if that's my legacy, beyond campaigns or awards or job titles, I'm at peace with it. Because in the end, the best revenge wasn't destroying Charles Peterson. It was becoming someone who no longer needed revenge at all.